All right, so here's our review video for the exam on Tuesday. So let's start with the fundamental graph. And the feedback in general was the graphs was the hardest part. So let's make sure that we understand the basics of the main graph, which is the aggregate supply, aggregate demand graph. Now I could put the long run aggregate supply line in there. I'm gonna leave that out. It tends to get overly crowded and it's not necessary for the purposes of the beginning. Let's make sure we understand the 4 different shifts. All right, so number 1, expansion, also known as demand pull inflation. And that is an increase in aggregate demand, okay? So expansion is just simply a rightward shift, right and up, if you will, of the aggregate demand curve as a result of an increase in consumption, investment, government spending, or net exports. All right? And it's going to lead to higher price level. Okay, that's where the inflation comes in. Okay, and GDP is going to increase as well. So remember, how aggregate demand goes, these are arrows, are supposed to be arrows going up, indicating price level goes up, GDP goes up. So aggregate demand, price level, and GDP follow. If it goes up, everything goes up. If aggregate demand goes down, price level and GDP also go down, okay? And because GDP increases, employment increases, income increases, and output increases. In general, when we think of a good economy, we think of expansion, even though price level goes up a little bit just in general in life and society, okay? And remember, the things that lead to more consumption, investment in governments, spending and net exports, consumption, wealth, good expectations, less debt, lower income taxes, lower interest rates. For more investment, we have lower interest rates, lower corporate taxes, lower costs of labor and resources. Okay, I'm sorry, I apologize. That's the aggregate supply. For investment, it's lower interest rates, lower corporate taxes, new technology. Government spending is just fiscal policy, so expansionary fiscal policy leads to expansion. And then remember, for net exports, weaker dollar, global prosperity. All right, so that's expansion. Make sure you know that, and if you know that, you know the other one, which is a decrease in aggregate demand. All right, which is number 2 here, for it's the second one, recession or contraction. All right, so aggregate demand decreases because consumption, investment, government spending, or net exports decreases. And that leads to a lower price level and a decrease in GDP. The decrease in GDP means lower employment, lower income, lower total output. There's also the lower price level. All right? You know one, you know the other. Okay, just make sure you know your 2 names. In general, we know that a recession is a bad thing for a society. So a stronger dollar, global weakness, contractionary fiscal policy, higher taxes, you get the idea, things that are going to slow down demand, are going to lead to recession or contraction. Okay. Number 3, supply side economics, or Reaganomics. All right, this is the best of both worlds. Price level goes down and GDP increases, sorry, I left out, aggregate supply increases. Okay, price level goes down, real GDP goes up, it's a rightward shift. Sorry, of the aggregate supply curve. All right, we can see price level decreases, real GDP increases, so employment, income, and output all increase, which is a good thing while price level is also being managed. Okay, this is why Ronald Reagan is so popular, historically, at least in terms of economics, because it worked out so well. So, what do you need for supply side economics? Less regulations, investment in technology, you know, the new technology, lower corporate taxes, okay? All of those things, lower costs of, this is one that's lower costs of labor and oil and energy, the key commodities, okay? Supply side economics. And the other one is stagflation or cost push inflation. So almost every one of these has two names. So stagflation is the opposite of supply side economics. It's the worst of both worlds. Price level goes up, okay, and GDP decreases, okay. All right, so this is, everything is bad. Not only is the economy slowing down, but things are becoming more expensive. What causes this? Higher corporate taxes, more regulations, natural disasters, okay, can be a key, you know, things that destroy infrastructure of society and shipping and that kind of stuff. I'm missing one, you know, higher costs of labor, higher corporate taxes, more regulations. You get the idea. Okay, so the fourth one is stagflation. Also cost push inflation. And that is a decrease in aggregate supply, price level goes up, GDP decreases. Okay? And those are your four shifts. That's it. Those are the only four shifts that I know about. Okay? We could get into double shifts in aggregate supply and aggregate demand. We're not going to worry about that. Okay? All right. So that's one of the graphs in question. Remember, aggregate demand shifts along. So if I say something, what's going to happen to the graph if there's an increase in income taxes? Well, income taxes is going to hurt consumption. That's going to decrease aggregate demand and lead to a recession or contraction. Okay. If I say there's an increase in expansionary fiscal policy, that's more government spending, that is increase in aggregate demand. I say that the dollar gets weaker, that's an increase in net exports, expansion. I say there's a natural disaster. So you need to be able to apply an event, what's going to happen, which of the four shifts is going to take place. Okay. While I have this up here, let's put our long run aggregate supply curve in here. All right. This is the economy at equilibrium. Okay, not in expansion, not in recession. And here we're at full employment for the economy, which is the natural rate of unemployment, which is 5% unemployment. Okay. Well, here we talk about employment, so you might want to argue that it's 95% employment. Don't worry too much about that. Just, this is full employment. It doesn't mean everybody has a job. Okay. And then there's the two types of economies based on long-run aggregate supply. Remember, long-run aggregate supply is what is a sustainable level of output for the economy, okay? So expansion can actually go past this. So this is an economy in expansion, which means that the unemployment rate is even lower than the 5%. We're going, but eventually it's gonna come back to the sustainable level. So this is expansion, and then the opposite is recession. We might as well go through what each one looks like. This would be an economy in recession. Just remember, SRAS just stands for short run aggregate supply. LRAS stands for long run aggregate supply. Okay. All right, so that's the main graph. Make sure you know that. Okay. I think the trickiest part is I think sometimes people forget that consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports are part of aggregate demand. Okay. If something's about productivity, more productive labor force, new technology, that tends to be a supply issue. Shipping, natural disasters, things that break down the ability to get things to people. Okay. All right. The money market. Really only need to know what's going to happen to the supply of money. I've got my supply of money, my demand for money. Here is the federal funds rate. The Fed funds rate is the rate at which banks borrow from one another in overnight lending. Here's our quantity of money. Well, if the Federal Reserve wants to lower the federal funds rate, they don't say, hey, let's lower the federal funds rate. They actually have to do something. So the discount rate, the rate that the Federal Reserve charges to banks that borrow, they can just say, okay, we're going to lower this from 4% to 3%. Because the banks are the ones doing the lending, the Federal Reserve manipulates the money supply, okay, to change the Fed funds rate. So remember, buy bonds, big bucks. If the Fed buys bonds, the supply of money increases and the Fed funds rate decreases. Okay. All right. Remember, for expansionary monetary policy, it's lower Fed funds rate, lower discount rate, lower reserve requirement. Okay. The only thing that gets bigger in the expansionary monetary policy is the money supply. And remember, it's BB, buy bonds, big bucks, increase in the money supply. Guess what? If I know that, well, contractionary is just the opposite. The Federal Reserve sells bonds to decrease the money supply. Okay, so SB, small bonds, or sell bonds for small bucks. They decrease the money supply, the Fed funds rate increases, okay, slows down the economy. Just make sure you remember, high interest rates in general are bad in terms of economic growth because people borrow to buy things, companies borrow to grow their business. There is a good thing for high interest rates if you're saving money. But in general, in terms of the economy overall, we like lower interest rates, which is why Jerome Powell has the interest rates, sustaining at historic lows over this period of the pandemic. Okay. And they're still not low enough for El Presidente. He wants negative interest rates, which even I don't understand. Negative interest rates essentially means you put money in the bank and you pay the bank to hold on to your money. Who the heck's gonna do that? Just stick it in your mattress. Okay. All right. So that's the money market, okay? That's pretty much all you need to know about the money market. Increase and decrease in the money supply, okay? The first graph, the aggregate supply, aggregate demand graph, that's the main thing, okay? The last thing, the Phillips curve. Remember, first of all, the Phillips curve is inflation versus unemployment, not employment. All right? And we say that there's an inverse relationship. Philip enjoys eating ravioli. Expansion, high inflation, low unemployment. Equilibrium. Aiden Vargas, what are the equilibriums for inflation and unemployment? That's right, 3% inflation and 5% unemployment. We consider 5% to be the natural rate of unemployment. That means that there is, natural rate of unemployment means there's no cyclical unemployment. And then here we have recession or contraction, okay? All right, so expansion and recession are along this original curve, okay? But what if we have high inflation and high unemployment? Jimmy Carter, Richard Nixon. Studebaker Television, Marilyn Monroe. We didn't start the fire. Well, then we have stagflation, okay? Stagflation. All right, high inflation, high unemployment. This is Carter and Nixon. That means the whole Phillips curve shifts this way, okay? Or what if, like Barack Obama and Ronald Reagan's presidency, we have low inflation and low unemployment. Then we have our supply side curve over here, and that's a good situation. This is where we want to be. I put a smiley face over here because we want to be closer to zero inflation and zero unemployment. Okay, so that's your Phillips curve. Covered 3 graphs. I think that pretty much covers. Make sure you devote a proportional amount of time to aggregate supply, aggregate demand. There's 3 graphs. You don't devote the same amount of time to the Phillips curve and to the money market. You know, you should be 2/3 of your time on the aggregate supply, aggregate demand graph. Okay? And then as the fractions break down, 1/6 of your time on the money market, 1/6 of your time on the Phillips curve. Okay? Remember, unemployment, the unemployment rate is the number of unemployed divided by the labor force. Who is in the labor force? Well, let's talk quickly about who's not in the labor force. Military's not in the labor force. Homemakers, retired people. Children under the age of 16. Full-time students. People that are incarcerated. People that are disabled. Okay? People that are just rich and don't feel like working. Okay? And then last but most importantly, discouraged workers are not part of the labor force. So this is the reason why, even though we're in a super bad time, the unemployment rate has been going down because a record number of people are leaving the labor force, okay? If they have not looked for work in 30 days, they drop out of the labor force. So we're decreasing the unemployed and the labor force by that individual that's a discouraged worker, which artificially lowers the unemployment rate. So what might happen as the economy gets better coming out of the pandemic, people are gonna start looking for work, not finding it right away, and our unemployment rate will go up, maybe 1%, because we'll have new unemployed looking for work and a bigger labor force. Okay, right now we have a crisis of people leaving the labor force. The natural rate of unemployment, remember frictional, structural, and cyclical are the types of unemployment. Check your notes for that. I don't want to make this video any longer than I have to because I'm worried people are going to zone out. The natural rate of unemployment equals frictional plus structural. Okay? So in other words, it's whatever, you know, as long as there's no cyclical unemployment. That is the natural rate of unemployment. And in general, we consider it about 5%. And the natural rate of unemployment means the economy is at full employment. Okay? All right, I think we're doing pretty good. I went past my goal of 20 minutes here. Please watch this more than once, okay? Twice would be good, okay? It's kind of like painting a wall in your house. One coat of paint just doesn't do it. And then complement it with the study guides and going over stuff. The test is on Tuesday. I care very much about you doing well. I want to get this over with so that maybe we can do a little bit more fun stuff between New Year's and the end of the semester. Okay? Thank you. Please take care of yourselves.